Nehemiah. You can turn to Ezra if you'd like. And, oh, you didn't tell me you were filming this.
I'm not doing anything, I'm sitting.
I had to watch myself on that, and it is hideous. Anyway, turn to the book of Ezra. Now, we're going to do a little bit of background here. That's why I hired me to do this. A couple of things that we need to remember, and we'll talk about them again as we get into the lesson more, but in the days of Israel, in the Old Testament days, Jewish nation, the whole nation centered around the temple. Isn't that freaky? The whole nation centered around the temple. Everything they did came from the temple. That's where their law was. That's where their religion was, if you will. That's where their leaders were. And that was the center of that whole nation, was that temple. And when you got out from the temple, you had a synagogue, which was, what, Jim Bob, a miniature temple, is where you kind of what's the word I'm looking for, satellite. So in the outlying areas, in your area, in my area, there'd be a synagogue. And that's what your life focused around. They had their sacrifices, they had their routines, they had their rituals, but everything focused around that. When they were taken into captivity, that was gone. And suddenly there was no more worship. Did I say it right?
Close.
So, there you go. So when you're talking about the nation being taken into captivity, they lost that temple. When they lost that temple, and they lost that ability to do the sacrifices, to have their meetings, to have their various feasts and programs that they had, you took their life away. That was what they focused on. And we can't, in the United States today, we can't even begin to comprehend what that was about. We just can't. So they were taken into captivity. And who wrote the book of, let's say, Chronicles? Who wrote the book of Chronicles? Jim Bob, don't answer. I know you do. Isn't that interesting? They thought it was written by Ezra. We're not sure, we can't prove it, but everything that comes about looks like it was written by Ezra. Who was Ezra? Tell me about Ezra. Wow, this is going to be a good study.
Yeah.
Don't know Ezra. Ezra was a priest prophet. Okay? He was a priest prophet, and Ezra was one of the great, if you will, to use that term, priest prophet. He had a following of knowing, and back up, erase that tape. He was a priest scribe. Priest scribe. What's a scribe do?
Right.
Writes. What's he write? What would a scribe in biblical times do? Scrolls.
The times, the events of the day.
Yeah, you're there.
Whatever's going on, what's happening.
They were responsible for the writings of the day. They kept, most of them would keep track of what was going on and how it was going on. They were responsible for the scrolls. They were responsible for the artifacts, if you will, that were involved in the, I'm going to say it again, worship service. And so the scribes were very, they followed the law. They were the ones that knew what to do and when to do it. They were the ones that knew what cup you used for what particular ceremony. They were the ones to know what book was needed for this particular thing. So they were the ones that guided the services in the temple. Ezra was so good at that when he went back, some say that the books were lost at one time, and that Ezra, through the inspiration of God, I don't know if it was Theopneustos or just God inspired, but he actually rewrote all those books. That's tradition. I don't know that it did happen, but he was accredited for doing that. So Ezra was an extremely smart guy, and he went back from captivity in Babylon back to Jerusalem for the purpose of rebuilding the temple. With me? So that was his purpose. Nehemiah went back to build what? The walls. Nehemiah went back to build the walls. Ezra was already there rebuilding the temple itself. And so when they went back, that was his job, and to get all the pieces and parts together to rebuild the temple itself. Now, we need to go to our little, you got your books? You got a book going in there? Why in the world should modern day Christians bother with the Old Testament books of Ezra and Nehemiah? Why do we bother to look at that? What's the purpose of going back and looking at it? History? They address the ongoing need for individual Christians and the church as a whole for restoration and renewal. Restoration and renewal. Psalm says it good. Create in me a clean heart and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me by your generous spirit. Restoration and renewal. And why would we go back and study that? What's restoration and renewal do with us right here today?
We need it as much as I did.
Desperately. Desperately. We do. And so it's important for us to look back and see what happened and know that we need to do that today. And I do. I can't speak for you guys, but I do. And it's amazing. And once you get into that, once you start into it, I haven't taught for how long? 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And I got this lesson. I had more fun doing this than you could imagine. I spent hours and hours and hours of stuff you would never see. And just track down words. And once you get into actually studying God's Word, it's so much fun. It really is. But we don't do it. And so that's the idea of that restoration and that renewal, to get us back to where we need to be with God. They provide leadership for our emulation. What's emulation? Imitate, to emulate, to copy, if you will. So it gives us leaders to look at, Ezra and Nehemiah and a bunch of other ones that we can look at and see what they did, what they gave up, the struggle and the strife that they went through to build that temple. Gives us a reason and a purpose to think we ought to do that too. Wouldn't be hard for us if it was for them. So it's important as we go back and look at those things. And the records and events and lives of real people like us, weak, ornery, I like that. Weak, ornery believers called by our Creator to a covenant relationship with Him, despite our persistent tendencies toward selfishness, disobedience, and rebellion. What is a covenant relationship?
It's where both parties contribute to it, they vow.
Part of it.
An action, you know.
That's part of it. That's part of it. What else? What is a covenant relationship? Covenant relationship. Jim Bob, tell them what a covenant relationship is.
Well, I think, as opposed to just a committed relationship, I think a covenant relationship is probably of the highest order in terms of establishing that relationship. And I think that's what the difference is between just a regular relationship, and this is on both sides. This is, for whatever type of relationship it is that's being established, this is probably the relationship of the highest order.
It would be. It would be. It would be. Covenant is what? A covenant is a promise, right? Covenant is a contract. When Blaine goes to a person, an individual, or a company or something to do their landscaping and stuff, you have a contract. You have a contract that's written out. And in that contract would be the parties, that would be Blaine and whoever he's working for, the conditions, and involved. What are you going to do? What are the conditions that you're going to work with? The results, you're going to take an oath place and make it pretty. And then the security. The security would be the oath or the promise. That would be the signature on the bottom of the page. That would be a contract. A covenant with God, a covenant relationship with God, would be a more intimate promise between you and God that God is going to keep. If He didn't keep it, we'd all be in trouble. We make promises, but we don't keep them. God does. And so that'd be a covenant relationship. It was important back then when you had a covenant with someone. You remember they would take the animals and cut them in half, lay them along the sides of a little crevice, cut them dudes in half, all just whack them in half, lay half on each side. Got down to the birds at the end. They didn't cut the birds in half. And then the person involved in it got blood running down the center of this thing. And they would walk around those animals in like a figure eight and go around those animals. And as you walk down through there, actually the word covenant means cut. And so that was a ritual that you did. If we had a contract, that's how we would seal that contract with that covenant going down. So that covenants were important back then. But the intimate covenant relationship with God would be even more in detail than that. The closest we can get would be marriage, Jim Bob. When someone gets married, that is a covenant relationship with God. And as I'm counseling people that are going to get married, people that are thinking about getting married, that's what we try to drive home, is you are standing in front of God. You are standing in the very face of God. And you're going to make a commitment that you're going to love this person, you're going to stay with this person, you're going to help this person in sickness and in health, and yada, yada, yada. And nobody comprehends what they're saying. They just think they can go to the courthouse and say some words and get married and walk away. But it's that covenant that you're making that holds that together. And that's where you go for the help. That's where you go for the support. So you understand what a covenant relationship is? Very intimate, personal relationship with God. They remind us of God's love for His chosen people, the Jews and the Gentiles alike. We are included in God's people. When the Bible refers to God's people, we are in that. We are God's people. God's propensity to extend mercy and grace to sinners, that blows my mind. That covenant relationship God has with us. Rachel knows me. She knows how much I goof up. And God loves me anyway. I wouldn't. If I were God, I'd just whack me out because I'm not worth it. But God loves us that much. The grace He gives us, the forbearance that He gives us, the tolerance that He gives us. It's just unbelievable. We think about what we are. And we think about what God is and how He has, through His mercy and grace, kept us in His love. It's mind-blowing. We have a tendency not to think about that. I think God's lucky to have me on His side. And we get totally whacked out so much. It also teaches God's covenant faithfulness to His chosen people. When God enters into a covenant with us, He's not going to break it. We're locked in. Most of us, I can't comprehend that even, because whatever we do, we are saved, we are accepted and saved by God. We can't blow that. As honoring as we get in the dumb things we do, we can't take that away. That's how much God loves us. So these are all reminders when we go back into the Old Testament of what God said and how He said it and why He said it. And God's sovereignty. And the sovereignty of God is overwhelming. We watch, if you watch TV, and you've heard me pray many times, if you watch TV now, they will scare you to death. You listen to the radio, and those news people will scare you to pieces. They got so much stuff going on, and the world is falling apart, and everybody's shooting everybody, and they're blowing up, and ISIS is going to break in your back door tomorrow and take you hostage, and all this, a lot of this stuff is real. And you can get so frustrated and scared and concerned that you're missing your life. But we have a sovereign God. We got a God that is allowing this to happen. And as we go through that study of Ezra and Nehemiah, we'll see God do that same thing. He took the nation Israel and put them through captivity, put them through being slaves, put them through being drugged from their country out to another country. And then he showed his sovereignty by turning right around and bringing them back and putting them where they needed to be. So it gives us hope as we look at that, particularly in the time that we're in now. And those books strengthen and deepen our theological root system. Now I want you to listen. This is cool. These are Duke's notes, by the way. I'm not that smart. And so he knows I can't write, and he knows I can barely read, so he wrote it all out for me. I want you to listen to this story. This is by Mark Roberts. As a child, I loved the Wawana tree in Yosemite National Park. It was a giant sequoia redwood that had been carved out as a tunnel while still standing as a living tree. I can still remember the thrill of being in my parents' car as we drove through the middle of that awesome tree. But several years ago, the Wawana tree fell to the ground and died. Naturalists investigated why the tree had fallen when it apparently was thriving, and they discovered that although nutriment and nourishment continued to flow to the high branches, the root system had been irreparably damaged. The weak roots finally could not support the giant tree, and it fell to a ponderous thud. Many Christians today suffer from what I call the Wawana system syndrome. They've been cut off from their theological roots. Well, that's kind of neat. And it goes on. The Old Testament feels distant and foreign, and it's written long ago about people who lived in a different world. Many Old Testament practices seem to be distasteful, animal sacrifices, for example. So most of us limit our Old Testament reading to a few Psalms, especially the ones we like. And we do that. That is so cool. And we might enjoy a smothering prophetic passage during Advent or Lent. But largely, and I underline this in red, we ignore the rest of our Old Testament roots. So, if you take the New Testament seriously, you got to go back to the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament is the roots to where the New Testament came. It's important that we study together. And if you remember, Jesus quite often went back to the Old Testament. He said, I didn't come to replace the Old Testament. I came to amplify it, bring it alive. And so it's important that we do it. And it's so interesting. When you start to read it, it is such an interesting set of books back there that there is everything in there you could possibly ask for. And but yet we don't seem to have a desire to go back. So hopefully this summer we're going to go back and learn some things that can be helpful to us. It's interesting too because he asked a question here. Who wrote these books? Ezra and Nehemiah. Who wrote them? Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, that was hard. They were compiled. Ezra and Nehemiah weren't written, they were compiled. They were compiled with artifacts, they were compiled with writings. And so as the books were put together, Ezra being the scribe, would take those books that he had, put them in here, add this to it, add this to it, add this to it. So he was basically compiling from all the things around him and bringing them together into the book of Ezra, as opposed to sitting down and writing it from his mind. Okay? And they also think, of course, that he wrote Chronicles as well. And they all think that it's possible that Ezra and Nehemiah were actually the same book. I don't think it was. There's a couple things in there that make me kind of think that it was not, that it were two different books, but some think that they were one book written and put together. Doesn't matter either way to me. These books are carefully assembled collection of many different sources, include historical narratives, personal correspondence, segments of private memoirs, and probably those of Ezra himself. The oldest manuscripts contain both Aramaic and Hebrew. And again, when and why do you think these books were written? We talked a little bit about why. Probably, that's it. Probably compiled between 400 and 440 BC. They can date it back different times using different things, but that's somewhere in the ballpark of where it was written. And the exiles returned to Jerusalem from Persia, probably to encourage them as a challenge to reestablish the broken nation. Restoring temple worship and rebuilding a destroyed city became increasingly difficult and dangerous. As they came back, well, Ezra and Nehemiah is a historical book. And if we read, only to find what went on in that 2,400 years ago, we'll miss the whole point. The author wanted to instruct and to edify the telling of the story of restoration through men named Ezra and Nehemiah. He selected certain primary sources, carefully crafted those books, and he was brought about for that purpose. So this next one is important. Read this. It should first be noted that historical records in ancient Middle East did not conform to the rules of modern historiology. The study of writing of history. The author of Ezra and Nehemiah is less concerned with chronological than he is with encouraging God's people by reminding them of God, his covenant faithfulness. In point of fact, many Bible scholars hold that the events described in Nehemiah actually precede much of the narrative account presented in Ezra. That's a big large sentence. If I were saying that, I'd say don't get caught up in the little stuff. Okay? That's my notes. Duke's was that long, man. Says don't get caught up in the little stuff. It doesn't really matter the events as far as what happened before, who did what, did this come before that. That's not the point. The point is that these are facts. These did happen. These were things that happened. But the idea is that we read the overall picture of that restoration and restoring of Jerusalem, of the temple and the temple walls and the Jewish nation. See what I mean on that? I have argued, I don't argue with people. I have had people argue with me over a little stupid fact. Well, this happened before that, you know, Eric. And people get caught up in those little, don't do that when you're reading these books. Just read the books, take them at what they say, and enjoy it and read it. Should it bother, well, I answered that question. Should it bother us that there's some discrepancies as far as timing and the way it's laid out? It really is. The first 6 chapters of Ezra cover 80 years, beginning with the royal decree of the Persian king Cyrus, continuing rebuilding the temple, and concluding with the first Passover celebration in Jerusalem in 150 years. It was interesting when they had that Passover, Duke will cover it when he gets there, but when they had that first service, that first Passover service, the young people were excited. They were just jumping and just the old people were crying. Because the old people remembered the majesty of Solomon's temple. They remembered the millions of people that were there celebrating. And it broke their hearts. They were back and they had their worship. Such a difference. And so that was a major deal. Duke will cover that when he gets to it. Chapter 7 through 10 only covers 1 year of Ezra's initial efforts to restore and reconsecrate God's people to his divine purpose, for which he had never abandoned. Certain events chronicled in Ezra, contemporary with the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. If you're looking for those words. Now this is interesting. The historical context. 1050 to 1010 BC was the reign of Saul, the first king of Israel. 1010 to 1003, David reigns as king of Judah. 1003 to 970, David reigns as king of a united Israel. And then it started going downhill. Okay? 970 to 930, Solomon reigns as king of an increasingly divided Israel. And in 930 BC, civil war leads to a divided kingdom. You know what happened? You know what happened? Okay, tell you what happened. When Solomon became king, there was a big ruckus came up. There was a guy named Jeroboam. And And there was a big ruckus and a commotion over who should be king and why he should be king. Jeroboam was a popular figure, people liked him, and Solomon was part of the David dynasty. So there was a lot of ruckus and a lot of commotion. It actually come back and led to a civil war where Solomon was really fighting for the kingdom, and there was a lot of civil wars going on back and forth and a lot of commotion happening. And finally, when Rehoboam became king, and down there are the 10 northern tribes, now the kingdom of Israel rebel against the rule of Solomon's successor Rehoboam, and they're cut off from God's covenant promise, called the 10 lost tribes. Rehoboam and Jeroboam did everything but get in a fist fight. Two bone boys, neither one of them were real bright. And Rehoboam was the king of David's line. Jeroboam was a guy that came in and was popular. And so they decided to make him king. He became a spokesman for the group. When Rehoboam came in, Rehoboam was a dummy. He was dumber than a bag of hammers. Rehoboam comes in. His daddy had been king, and his daddy had taxes and all these things imposed on the people. So suddenly Rehoboam is king. So Jeroboam comes to him and he says, you know what, your dad has just taxed the daylights out of us for so long. And our taxes are high, we're not getting anything out for it, so can you cut the taxes down, give us a break, and let's get off of this thing. And he said, give me 3 days to that. So he goes to the older guys in the community, and he sits down, me and you, Blake. They go to us and he said, what do you think we ought to do? I said, well, if you want to have a peaceful nation, if you want people to like you, if you want people to be part of this kingdom, then yeah, lower the taxes. Make it easy for them. You know, just treat them nice. So he goes to the younger guys, that would be these guys. He goes to the younger guys and he says, hey, you're in charge, man. Don't let them tell you what to do. Just squash them suckers. Raise them taxes, push them down harder, get what you can get, and the heck with them. Which one do you think Rehoboam followed?
The other ones. The younger ones.
The younger ones. So he raised the taxes. He was a tyrant. He raised the taxes. He came down on the people. And the people just went ballistic. And so there was a major bunch of ruckus going on back then at that time. And so basically, when that happened, that's when the nation started to divide and split apart. They cut it into two sections. I don't know, can you see that? That's where your dividing line was. That's the main, up here is where that dividing line was between the two nations. Okay? And when the nation split, Jeroboam, being smart, now Jerusalem is right here. Okay? Jerusalem is the center of the Jewish worship. So Jeroboam figures these guys are going to go down here. They're Jewish people. They've always gone to that temple. They're going to cross that line. They're going to go down into there. So he put a worship center right here and another one up here. Okay? One up here and one down here. Here's Jerusalem. So he had both ends covered to have worship centers. But he was so ungodly that in each of those two cities was a great big giant golden calf. I mean, he was a total dipstick. And so there was these golden calves in each of those worship centers. And so the nation just disintegrated. It just disintegrated. But it was overtaken pretty quick. The Assyrians came in and just took them because they were just kind of probably spaced out in Europe. They didn't know they were taken captive. But then later, later the kingdom of Judah was overtaken. So let's drop down here. Digression. The scarlet thread of God's covenant promise, which will connect King David to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, will run through two southern tribes, now the kingdom of Judah. So as the nation was split, Jesus is coming through that southern tribe. through that line of David. Got me? Okay. The fall of Israel to the Assyrians was in 722 BC. 605, the gradual fall and captivity of Judah, which culminates in the complete destruction of Jerusalem, including the temple by the armies. They not only took the city, they destroyed the city. They busted it up. Remember, Jesus said not one rock would be on another. That's what they did. They just annihilated. So as the captives were being taken into a foreign country, they're looking over their shoulder and they're seeing their city annihilated. They're done. They're done. They're over. Their life is finished. And so they're walking off with no hope whatsoever. They're walking off with their temple destroyed. They're walking off with their homes destroyed. They're just shocked. And off they go into captivity. Nebuchadnezzar, of course, was the king of Babylon at the time. The fall of the Babylon Empire to a Persian king, Cyrus. Interesting read if you have a chance. Part of the general policy, Cyrus, as part of his setup, the way he operated. Well, let's go back to Nebuchadnezzar. We got a couple minutes. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. You remember all the stories about Nebuchadnezzar? Okay. He was the king of Babylon. When they were taken captive. Now, you go back to Cyrus. Cyrus had a way of taking over a country. When Nebuchadnezzar took over a country, he just destroyed it. He just went in, took what he wanted, destroyed the rest of it. That's what it was. Kind of a tyrant, ruling with an iron fist, and just didn't care. Cyrus was smart. Cyrus is a smart guy because what he does is he allows the people to live like they want to live. You don't have time to worry about who they worship. You worship who you want to worship. You build your own temple. You do your own thing. You want to worship? That's cool. Do what you want to do. You want to start a business? Do it. I don't care. He just let them go right about their own business, and all he did was collect taxes. And that was cool. And so working and living under Cyrus was a whole lot different than they'd ever experienced before. Cyrus had a neat way of doing things, and it worked out well for him. Let's see. Thus says Cyrus the king. Oh, okay, we'll wait. So when they're living with Cyrus, now, as Cyrus took over, the Jews actually prospered in Babylon. Most people think they were making bricks, and they weren't servants or slaves. And they were living there. Cyrus had allowed them to do what they wanted to do. They started businesses, they were prospering, they had homes, they had all kinds of things. And that's why only some of the people went back. They weren't standing at the gate to go back. A lot of them didn't go. And so the fact that they were living well afforded those that went back, those that stayed could actually help support and pay for their expenses and their travel that they needed to go back to the city. Follow me there?
This is just the southern kingdom now that we're taking into captivity.
The whole nation's going now.
But the other 10 tribes had already been.
They'd already been going.
Isn't that interesting that you started out talking about covenants? That it was possible under the leadership of a bad leader that 10 tribes, millions of people, got separated from the covenant.
Yep.
Not through the activity of any given one, but through the activity of the leadership of the king, who was sovereign, which was in human terms, was able to separate them from the covenant. And it seems to me that that's a scary thing.
It is.
Okay. That tells me that I, as a Christian, new covenant now, have a certain amount of, and this is controversial, have a certain amount of say in whether or not I'm going to be in God's covenant. At the same time, we're told that, and this is Calvin's take on it, which I do agree, and I do too, that
Really?
no, God says, not you, Eric. You don't say what's going to happen to you again. God says. Okay, So we've got this situation where 10/12, 5/6 of the nation of Israel, who were recipients of the promises given to Abraham, are just gone. In fact, a lot of their genes are probably in the Muslim faith right now, fighting against Jews, because they were dispersed. We don't know what happened. But
Do you
there's a
think-
limit sometimes to God's.
And do you think that was a permanent condition? Do you think that was a permanent,
For those 10 tribes it was, but we're finding that something that I have seen many times in Scripture, that God always preserves a remnant for himself.
that's what I was gonna tell you, it didn't,
Not permanent.
it wasn't permanent because there was always a remnant. There were those that weren't taken captive, there were the older folks and those that they didn't take. And then there's been a remnant that came out. And we know that because in Revelation, we got 144,000, 12,000 from each of the tribes are gonna be here in the end times in Revelation. So those tribes weren't totally lost. And that covenant wasn't totally broken, but they sure been that.
I think we're the remnant now. To the extent that you stay faithful.
What tribe you with?
Oh, wow.
That's
I was
good,
out
Eric.
there near the New Jerusalem, that's the.
There you go.
tribe I want.
Yeah, you're right, you're right. We're talking about Cyrus. Cyrus was prophesied nearly 200 years before he actually became ruler, that he was going to be the one to set the Jewish nation free. Isaiah 44:21. Somebody read that. Isaiah 44:21. Isaiah's on the other side of the psalm.
Remember these, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I have formed you. You are my servant, O Israel. You will not be forgotten by me.
That's Isaiah 44:21.
Yep. 44:20. Yep.
Look at 44:28.
He says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid.
First mention of Cyrus, that was 200 years before Cyrus actually became involved with Israel. So 200 years before it happened, God predicted it, the prophets said it by name of who would be the one to set them free. God referred to him as his shepherd and his servant. You think he was a Christian, quote unquote? You think he was a follower of God? What do you think? Linda says no. God says he's my shepherd, he's my, was he one of God's people? But we got one no. Carol said yeah.
He was one of God's people according to God, but not according to what he thought.
God uses
Yeah.
even the ungodly. God controls, and that's part of God's sovereignty. And so God used Cyrus, but we have no indication. There's a couple of readings. Here's one. Thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, the Lord of God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build his house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of his people, may the Lord his God be with him, let him go up. That sounds like a letter from a pastor to me. But he'll turn right around and write that same letter to a pagan and let them go up. So he was used. I don't think he was any more than a little pawn that God used to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. We gotta go through this. On the next page, page 5, Note the striking similarity between 2 Chronicles 36:23 and Ezra 1 through 3. Somebody read those. 2 Chronicles 36:23. And somebody else read Ezra 1, 2, and 3.
You said 36:23?
Yes, 2 Chronicles 36:23.
Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me. And he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all his people? May the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up.
Okay, Ezra 1, 2, and 3.
This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any one of his people among you, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem.
Sound pretty much the same?
Yep,
Think maybe the same guy wrote them?
good news.
So
Could very
God
well,
dictated it.
could very well be. Could very well be. The phase in verse 1, it says the first year of Cyrus. That would have been during the first year of Cyrus's rule over Babylon and Judah. Okay? Not his first year as king, or his first year as world leader, if you will, but that was the first year he was dealing with them. By the time he conquered Babylon, Cyrus had ruled the empire of the Medes for 20 years. By the time of his death in 530 BC, he expanded the small kingdom into the largest empire in the world, and Cyrus claims to be king in verse 2 of the whole earth. And we talked about his decree and the fact that he rebuilt this as he went along. History tells us that Cyrus did business with all lands that he conquered. He worshipped the Persian gods, but seemed to have respect for all deities, including Yahweh. He held the sacred places of all religions with high regards. Now, unlike ISIS, the scourge of today's Middle East, Cyrus had learned that repatriating foreign captives was good, and public morality was good. Seemed to really be the popular way and the popular support that his ruling used and worked well. And it's a shame more of them don't use that now. The Babylonian kings, by contrast, and we had talked about that, just were a harsh bunch and did what they wanted to do. In his proclamation, 3b, in his proclamation, Cyrus didn't force the Jews to leave. He allowed them or invited them to leave. And again, some of them had businesses. They were prosperous. They had homes. They didn't want to go. I don't want to go back there for it. They have a nice home, they have a nice business. A guy might have a nice tire business or something, selling used cars, and the business was good, so they were happy to stay there, didn't want to go. Other ones were biting at the bit to go. So there was two groups of Jewish people back then as far as leaving. Cyrus had a written decree, and that's critical importance. 20 years later, his successor Darius decided to let the Jews finish the temple project and found a copy of the decree, and that was sealed, and that was the closing factor. He wanted to do it. He found it in writing. If a king had it in writing, that was it. That was the way it was. So he was able to go back. So we know this happened. We have proof, history and historical proof that all of Ezra and Nehemiah was real. Okay? Verse 5 describes how living in Babylon and who decided to return to Jerusalem. The heads of the fathers' houses and the leaders of various small groups of Jewish people living under Cyrus. All of those spirits had been stirred by the Lord. All those who returned to Babylon, to Jerusalem, both lay people and leaders, were people motivated by God. The Hebrew expression, whose spirits God has moved, uses the same verb found in 1:1. The Lord stirred up in the spirit of Cyrus. Both verses depict God alone as the author of restoration, as the one who stirred up Cyrus to proclaim liberation, who stirred up the people to embrace their new freedom. How long were they in captivity?
70 years.
70 years. So at the end of 70 years, as they're getting close to that end, the scribes, those people that had been looking and studying and seeing, knew we're getting to the end now. 70 years, God's going to do something. I'm not quite sure what, not quite sure how, but he's going to do something. Going to use some guy named Cyrus, and we're going to get out of here. And so they were starting to get excited, and things were building up. The Levites, why is that critical? The Levites, why is their inclusion so critical?
They were the ones who would care for the temple. They were the ones who would care for the temple and the activities that went into the temple.
Okay. And what else? Yes, you're right.
Lead the worship. They would
They
lead
led
the
the worship.
worship.
I'm telling you, make them think. Through the Levites, the priests came through the Levites as well. The priests were Levites. So you had your priests, you had your leaders, you had your workers. The Levites were the worker bees of that whole operation. So they had to have the Levites back there.
Well, and also, I think, in the process of rebuilding, they, where the original temple was, and then to go through that process of rebuilding, the Levites played a significant role in that rebuilding process as
Yep.
well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they were the worker bees. They were the ones that put up the tabernacle. They were the only ones that could handle the tabernacle. They were the worker bees. They were our deacons. So the answer, why was their inclusion so critical? Because everything that happened in temple worship was in and through and around the Levites. Not only did those who decided not to return to Jerusalem help them, but King Cyrus took it upon himself to send along the temple treasures, which had been looted by Nebuchadnezzar before the army destroyed Jerusalem. Remember I told you, Nebuchadnezzar came in and just took everything that was and destroyed it. Well, he brought those artifacts back. And to the Jewish people, these were important things. This was an artifact out of the temple. That was a precious item. He took them back and put them over in a room somewhere where he could bring them out and use them for parties. Cyrus gave those back. So he gave Ezra, not only did he allow Ezra to go back, but he went and gave him all of those artifacts that he had that were there that they could take back with them. We're introduced to two strange names, and Duke has them written up there. Reditha and Sheshbazzar. See the name up there, M-I-T-H-R-E, and Sheshbazzar. These are Old Testament characters, and we have no idea who they are. They put them in there, and they did something, and God put them in His Bible, but nobody knows really why. And so it's kind of like maybe dedicating a book to somebody, but they're in there, and it's kind of unique. So one's in Ezra 1, one's in Ezra 5. He goes on to describe in verse 8 as Prince of Judah, which leads some to identify Sheshbazzar as the son of Jehoiakim, who was the king of Judah, but wait a minute. They're just kind of guessing, so you can read that or not. Others suggest that he may in fact be Zerubbabel, but I don't think he was that either. Let's move over to the next one. Duke's got a couple of questions here he wants us to answer, so let's roll along with it. Over on page 7. What is the man's chief end is to do what? According to the very first question in the shorter Westminster Catechism.
Glorify God.
Yes. How'd you know that? That is good.
Listen.
Glorify God, and what's the bottom two?
Enjoy Him forever.
Forever. That's what we are here to do. Glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Isn't that cool? I thought I was here to...
Sure simplifies it, doesn't it?
It does. Wouldn't it be nice if it was that simple?
Probably is.
that light, we must remember that at least one of God's reasons for releasing his chosen people from captivity and directing them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple was so that his, what, Janie?
Marshall.
Yes, could be properly reestablished. God put them back to glorify him where they could get back, rebuild that temple and get back to the glorifying God business. All right, y'all did bad. I took you out behind the woodshed and spanked you for 70 years, now get back here and worship me. Let's get this temple going. Let's get this services back into operation. Let's go some glory to God. That was the deal.
As a matter of testimony, as a very young Christian in my 20s, there's a difference between a young child that's converted to Christ, because we introduce our kids as toddlers to God, and they almost don't know they exist themselves, so it's a different process. But as an adult convert, I was like a sponge, and it was the Old Testament as much as it was the New Testament. Cyrus being mentioned by name 200 years before he came on the planet, amazing. Things like the 80, was it 80 years or 70 years that they're in captivity? 70, okay. It actually happened.
Yeah,
These things are happening over periods of lifetimes. They're not like one person manufactured this stuff and wrote it down so that it would match some other prophecy. You got different prophets doing things all at the same time and across lifetimes, and it's coming true, and it's coming true. And because I was like a sponge, I could pull all this stuff together, you know. And I'm an answer there, so I'm a problem solver. And I pull stuff from nature, I pull stuff from the law, I pull stuff from the courthouse, I pull evidence from the ground, I put it together and put the puzzle together. And you can do that with the Old Testament. And these books that you're reading right now are part of the reason I'm a Christian now.
How neat is that?
That is extremely
It
neat.
is.
It means we should need to be going back into the New Testament with routine effort.
Into the Old Testament and go through it. And Carol, at Misfits, remember we were talking about sharing the Lord and how we need to reach out to people and answering the dumb questions that are thrown at us. These are some of the things you can use for that.
Yeah.
Somebody asks you, you're talking to somebody about the Lord, and they say, well, how do I know the Bible's real? And if they're real, if they want to know, if they're not just jerking you around, that's some stuff that you can use. You go back and this is history. This is real. It was prophesied, it happened. This was prophesied, it happened. They actually mentioned this dude's name before he was born. So there's some little things that we can use to help us when people are questioning that want to know, not people that are just trying to jerk me around. People don't want to know. That's neat, Eric. I like that. Cyrus was a champion of religious pluralism. What is that? What is religious pluralism?
Worship of many gods.
Whatever you believe is okay.
I'm okay, you're okay. I'll worship the flyers, you worship the salt shaker, and, you know, whatever you want to do is cool. So he was a champion of that. He allowed the Jews to return to Judah, but with all their worship artifacts to rebuild the temple. He also let pagan captives return to their home countries with all their idols and rebuild their temples. Should he be applauded for this? Aren't those who believe the United States to be a Christian nation supposed to deplore religious pluralism? Aren't we supposed to deplore religious pluralism because we're Christians? You want those Jews down there worshiping? You want those Hindus over here in this?
That's not our job.
You want that mosque built up there in Boonesboro that they're gonna build? The one in Waynesboro out by your house, you want that? You don't know you're gonna build that, do you? Yeah, they're putting a mosque out there at the end of the road between. So what do you think? Should he be applauded for that, for that religious pluralism, or not? Is that good or bad?
Well, after the Constitution said there would be freedom of religion, that meant that you would be allowed to worship however you so desired, and the government should not be involved in deciding who you worship. That's part of the establishment of our nation.
So it's okay.
Yep.
Yep.
So it's all right for those
It's our job.
Muslims that put a church in there. It's okay for those.
They're stupid enough to sell the land to them.
Definitely a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
It is, because
The freedom is a two-edged sword because it allows Christianity absolutely to prosper
Yep.
in the presence of other religions,
Yep.
which is your mission field. So your bid's been delivered to you on a platter. You get to prosper, and the people that you're supposed to be ministering to go out into the world and
But,
make them,
okay, now what you're saying is good in a perfect world. But when you get the news media, as the news media is today, and I'm not gonna get into politics, but when you get the news media as the news media is today, the Christians and the other religions, how does that play out? We're supposed to have freedom of religion, do we?
everybody has freedom of religion.
Can you take your Bible book into where you work and lay it down on your desk and say, here, let me show you about my Bible book? Can you do that?
It's a two-edged sword. It is a two-edged sword.
But you can take the Quran
Yep.
in and lay it down, and you can put a prayer shawl there beside of it, and you can put a little kneeling cloth there beside of it, and you can get down on your knees and go through your abba-dabba-doos, and that's okay. But I can't pick up my Bible book, open it up, and read that Bible book out loud and do it. Is that fair?
That's not.
So is pluralism good? Or should we say this is a God-fearing nation founded under God, and the rest of you dudes go back home?
We just have to stand up for our rights and just as a Christian.
We can't force people to believe the way we can. We can only encourage them to.
Can only be any-
This is where leadership comes in too,
And we don't have that.
and our government comes in too, because they've allowed it to be changed.
So was Cyrus good or bad in letting that? If he would have stopped them right then and just let the Christians go back, let the Jews go back, and not let the rest of them go, how much different would the world be?
Or a Levite or anything. Cyrus is just a guy like you and I who got converted, who's a sinner.
Was he converted, or was he
No,
just
no, he
simply?
was being used by God and being used by God by letting Jews go back. He had to let everyone else go back, or else there would be probably a civil war or something like that.
The verses we read in Chronicles and in the other source that were almost word for word, Cyrus is absolutely saying, I believe. There is one God. That God is in Jerusalem. So says the king. This is a powerful stuff, okay? But still, he's a person who did not believe before, but appears to believe now. And he's an infant in his understanding of the faith, for sure, so he probably made mistakes. But the alternative to having what we have now in our country, not in the world, but in our country, is to have ISIS, okay, where Christianity is it. We will behead you if you're not Christians. That is not in any way part of the plan of God. So what do we have? We have one where we have tolerance. What should I do as a Christian? Should I be tolerant about other religions? All I'm called to do is to tell you there is one God. There is one Savior, and it's Him crucified. Okay, that's all I'm called to do. I'm not called to be a governor or the president or anything else. I'm just called to do my part of the job. If another religion gains a foothold, it's because I haven't done my job.
Okay. All right. That was just Duke just wanted to stir you guys up. I told him it wouldn't happen, but I would try, so we did. You'll be happy when he sees the film. It kind of goes both ways. It is, everything you said was true, and there is no right or wrong. And religious pluralism is good because we do have the freedom of religion. Sometimes it gets out of control, and we are the ones who we find under, and the other religions are benefiting more than we are, but it's all part of God's sovereign plan. That's the
God says we are ruled by the laws of
That's the
God.
good part of it. I will add one thing to this. And we've got 5 minutes and I got 2
We
more
got to close
questions.
it down.
Yeah, I don't want to stop in the middle of a sentence. When you think about religious pluralism, I want you to think about the Lord's Prayer and prayer in churches. It amazed me when they took the prayer out of churches, how many people got upset. That blew my mind. You can't pray in church, we're not gonna have prayer in church anymore.
You mean school?
In school, I mean, I'm sorry. That's why I do don't let me teach. When they took prayer out of the schools, everybody got upset, and I couldn't imagine why they did. And it amazed me, and it still does. I thought it was good, because if you would have had those prayers in church, one day you would have a Christian come in, the next day you would have an Islam come in, the next day you would have a Jewish person come in, the next day you might have a Satan worshiper come in, and they all would have access to that prayer. That'd been open to anybody. A Christian could pray anywhere, anytime. And so I just, it was amazed how everybody get up and fall, and I thought, you guys get that, you're opening the box, you're not gonna be able to shut. Lane?
If you guys remember the shooting at Frederick High School,
Yes.
we were there.
Yeah.
We played basketball, so we were there. And when we were all being held in the cafeteria, a large group of students, one represented them with a prayer, a beautiful prayer, and ended it in Jesus' name. And there were a lot of amens in there in that public school. And we didn't hear anything negative about it at all.
There you go. That's amazing. So we can pray anywhere and anytime we want to, and that's good, and it was neat that it was there. Makes a difference. Makes a difference. But religious pluralism is just, like Eric said, it's a two-sided sword. You gotta be careful with it, what it is. God's desire, then, the principle on display in Ezra is that God desires reconciliation with all of his fallen creation, particularly the restoration of his people, his pleasure. If you go back, remember his pleasure, glorify and enjoy him forever and ever. So reconciliation and restoration. God is sovereign and has the authority over all creation, visible and invisible, including the good nations and the evil nations. When ISIS is doing what they are doing and ISIS is scaring the daylights out of everybody, God is sovereign. And I have no idea why, but God is allowing that to happen. They're not sneaking up on him. God's not back in the back room with Harry Reid trying to figure out what to do. God is in control. God's in control of everything. Sure, Christians believe the biblical truth, but how do we explain it to those outside the church who consider our claim to be totally inconsistent with the evil, misery, violence, disease, injustice, yada yada that's going on today? It's difficult when people ask you that. Well, if your God is so good, why does he allow ISIS to go over there? A couple people said so. Answer is,
He's not doing it.
he is allowing it to happen.
Yeah, well,
He's a sovereign God, and he knows and he could stop it, but he don't. But I have no idea. But I know he's a
He allowed
sovereign.
us to eat that stupid apple back in the garden.
Yep. So there are times when those things come up that we don't know. I don't know. But I know that God is a sovereign God, and I know that he's not. That's what it is. God keeps his covenant promises with his people. And we're going to close with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all ways and he will make your paths straight.
Yes. And Isaiah 45, 5 through 7. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun, from the far west, that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these. It's 11 o'clock.